There are people who carry grief quietly. They don't announce it. They don't wear it on their face every morning when they sit in front of a camera and smile for millions of people. They just carry it, and somehow day after day they keep going. Savannah Guthrie has done exactly that for years. Every single morning, composed and warm and present, she shows up as the anchor of one of the most watched morning programs in America. To most people on the other side of the screen, she looks like someone who has everything together. Like someone whose life, if it has weight, doesn't show it. But there was something she never fully talked about. Something that lived in the background of her life, quiet and heavy, the kind of thing you don't bring to work because the work simply has to go on. Her mother, Nancy Guthrie. A woman who raised her. A woman who shaped the way she sees the world, the way she handles difficulty, the way she holds herself in moments when most people would break. A woman whose voice was probably somewhere in the back of her mind every single time she stepped in front of that camera and told the world the news. And then there was a note, not a headline. Not something her publicist drafted, not a public message approved by a network. A note, personal, private. The kind of thing you write when the words feel too large for a normal conversation. When what you want to say can't survive the interruptions and the silences of a regular exchange. When you need to sit alone and find exactly the right words and leave them somewhere they can last. What was in that note surprised people, not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that shook headlines or demanded attention. It surprised people in the quiet, aching way that truth sometimes does when something small suddenly explains something enormous. When a single detail opens up everything you thought you already understood. This is that story. To understand why that note mattered so deeply, you first have to understand who Savannah Guthrie actually is, not the version the camera shows, but the person underneath it. She was born in Tucson, Arizona in 1971. Her family moved around during her childhood, settling in different places, different schools, different rhythms. That kind of upbringing does something to a person. It teaches you to adapt without complaint, to read the room fast, to find your footing somewhere new before anyone notices you were ever unsteady. Those are not small skills. They would carry her further than she probably understood at the time. Then, when she was 16 years old, her father died. That single fact changes the shape of everything that comes after it. Losing a parent at 16, when identity is still forming, when the world still feels like it should be safe, doesn't leave cleanly. It restructures how you hold time. It makes you watch the people you love differently. It either teaches you to pull back from attachment or to grip the people around you with both hands. For Savannah, it seems to have made her hold tighter. Nancy Guthrie became the anchor after that loss, not in any dramatic or visible way, not the kind of strength that announces itself. More in the daily, unglamorous way, the dinner that was made when it didn't have to be, the question asked at the right moment. The presence that stayed steady when everything else in the house was still reverberating with the shock of an absence. That kind of quiet reliability is easy to overlook. It is not easy to live without. Savannah went on to study law, then journalism. She built her career slowly and seriously, working through local reporting, through legal correspondence, through Washington press rooms that are not warm environments and do not reward people who need warmth to function. She earned her place through years of work that had real substance behind it. By the time she joined NBC's Today Show as co-anchor in 2012, she had already argued before the Supreme Court. She had reported from inside some of the most charged political environments of her generation. None of it had been handed to her, and through all of it there was Nancy, in the background. In the phone calls. In that particular relationship that forms between a mother and daughter who have survived something hard together. The unspoken language, the shorthand. The understanding that doesn't always need words, because enough years have passed that words aren't always necessary anymore. That's what makes a note mean something. When language between two people has already gone beyond the surface, a written word carries more weight than it would for strangers. By most visible measures, Savannah Guthrie had built something complete, a meaningful career. A marriage to Michael Feldman that produced 2 children she has spoken about with a kind of unguarded tenderness you don't often see from people who spend their professional lives in front of cameras. A home, a morning routine that millions of Americans made part of their own mornings, without thinking too hard about who was really on the other side of that screen. Morning television is a strange kind of intimacy. It asks you to enter someone's home at their most unguarded hour, before the day has put its armor on, and be present with them in a way that feels safe, consistent, real. It's technically a performance, but the best versions of it barely feel like one. The best anchors carry something genuine into the room, and viewers sense it even if they couldn't name what it is. Savannah seemed to genuinely belong there. People who have watched her across the years tend to describe the same impression, that what you see is close to what is actually there. That the warmth isn't manufactured, that the wit isn't produced for a camera, that when something moves her on air, it's because it honestly does. But behind that consistency, something was being managed carefully. Nancy's health had become a private concern, a slow, quiet shift in the texture of things. The kind of health story that doesn't announce itself in a single moment, but changes the register of every phone call over time. Changes the way you listen. Changes what you're listening for. Savannah has spoken about her mother in interviews over the years, never over-explaining, never using it as material, always specifically, the particular memory. The thing Nancy said once that stayed with her, the quality of her mother's faith, the way Nancy faced things that would have undone most people. Nancy Guthrie was, by every account from those who knew her, a woman whose faith was not ornamental. It wasn't the kind of belief that shows up at holidays and stays quiet the rest of the time. It was structural. It was the framework through which she understood loss, time, hardship, and the particular kind of fear that comes when someone you love is suffering. It was the lens she had used to process her husband's death, and it had shaped her daughter not always visibly but steadily over decades in ways that would only become clear later. When you understand that foundation, the note begins to make more sense. There is a particular kind of change in a family when a parent becomes not just older but fragile. When the person who was always the stable point, the one you could call, the one whose voice could settle you without trying, starts to need stability themselves. The phone calls shift. The visits carry a different weight. You notice things you weren't noticing before, and you can't unnotice them. For Savannah, that shift happened the way these things always do, gradually, and then in ways that couldn't be managed gradually anymore. Nancy's health declined past a point where the future could still feel abstract. The conversations changed. The silences in them changed. Those conversations are hard for anyone. They are a particular kind of hard when your public life requires uninterrupted composure, when millions of people expect you to show up every morning and carry the news steadily, while your private life is asking you to carry something entirely different at the same time. You can't put either one down, you just carry both. Savannah never made her private grief into a public story while it was happening. She didn't announce it. She showed up morning after morning and she did the work. People watching would never have known. That kind of contained grief is harder than the visible kind in some ways. It requires a particular discipline, not the suppression of feeling but the management of it. The ability to be present in the public space while something private runs beneath it, constant and real. But Nancy, during that same period, was doing something quiet of her own. She was writing. Not for an audience, not for anyone but Savannah. Writing the way a mother writes when she understands that her words will need to outlast her presence. When she knows that there will be mornings, too many of them, when her daughter will wake up and reach for something that can no longer be reached. So she put it down, on paper, in a note. No one knew exactly what it said, not publicly, not then. When Savannah eventually spoke about the note, not as a headline, not as a revelation, but quietly, in a conversation that didn't announce its own significance, what she shared was not what most people were expecting to hear. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a confession, it wasn't a deathbed declaration designed to carry maximum weight. It was something much smaller than that, and because it was smaller, it was somehow more. Nancy had written about faith, about what she believed waited on the other side of this life, not as a hope exactly, more as a certainty. The kind of belief that has been tested enough times that it no longer shakes easily. She had written it the way you write something when you want the person reading it to feel less afraid. Not of losing her specifically, of the larger thing that loss always points toward, the question that no one can answer and everyone is quietly carrying. Savannah, describing the experience of reading it, spoke about feeling her mother in every line. The faith wasn't general. It wasn't the vague comfort of a sympathy card. It was Nancy, particular, specific, deliberate. The voice was hers fully, the belief was hers fully. You could feel from the way Savannah talked about it that the note didn't feel like a message from someone who was preparing to disappear. It felt like a message from someone who was refusing to disappear entirely. The detail that quietly moved people, the one that seemed to stay with those who heard about it, was this: Nancy had not written the note at the very end. She had written it before things had gone too far. She had written it while she was still fully herself, her mind clear, her voice intact, because she wanted what she left behind to be hers and not grief's. She didn't want her final words to her daughter to be shaped by fear or exhaustion or the blur of a hospital room. She wanted them to be chosen. That is an extraordinary thing to do for someone you love. It means she sat down in a quiet moment with enough clarity to find the right words, and she made a deliberate decision about what she wanted to leave. Not instructions, not arrangements. A piece of herself preserved, her voice given permanence on a page. For Savannah, reading it in the silence that follows loss, in those early days when the absence is loudest, must have felt like hearing her mother speak into the room again. Like a small, determined refusal to be entirely gone. That is not a small thing to give someone, and the question it leaves behind, how many of us will do that? How many of us will find that kind of clarity and use it that way before the moment passes? Is one that people seem to carry with them after hearing the story, even if they couldn't quite say why. Savannah has faced hard things publicly in ways that required a courage most people don't fully appreciate. In 2020, she shared with viewers that she had lost vision in one eye, what appeared, according to reports at the time, to be a retinal detachment. She didn't frame it as a crisis. She stated it the way she states things, directly, without excessive weight, and then moved forward. That's a pattern if you pay attention to it across her career. She has a way of meeting difficulty without letting it define her publicly. She acknowledges it and continues. What people noticed, though, was the quality of how she carried it, not with despair. Not with performed resilience, with something grounded and measured that doesn't come from nowhere. That kind of steadiness has a history behind it. It has been built by something, by years of belief, by the particular inheritance of a mother who showed her how to face things without collapsing. That inheritance didn't make grief easier. When Nancy died, it made the grief heavier in some ways, because what she lost was also the source of what had steadied her. But it also made the grief something she could hold. Something she could survive without it breaking her shape. Grief is strange in a public life. The cameras don't pause for private loss. The news doesn't take a week off because someone you love is gone. You sit at that desk and you talk about the world's stories while your own story is happening somewhere behind your eyes in the hours before and after. You smile when the moment asks for a smile. You are moved when the story is genuinely moving. You keep being present even when presence costs you something real. Savannah continued, she kept showing up. And somewhere in her home, in a drawer, in a folder, in whatever quiet place she chose for something that precious, there was a piece of paper with her mother's handwriting on it. That was what carried her, not a philosophy, not a public narrative of resilience. A note, a few pages, her mother's voice made permanent by the simple act of writing it down before it was too late. There is something broader that the note quietly points toward, though, something beyond one family's story. We live in a time when everything is documented and very little is actually preserved. Photographs accumulate by the thousands on phones and in cloud accounts that may or may not outlast us. Messages are sent and deleted and sent again. We are constantly producing words, and very few of them are written for the long term. Very few of them are written with the understanding that someone might need them on an ordinary morning years from now, when the person who wrote them is no longer there to say anything new. Nancy Guthrie sat down and did that differently. The reason it moved people when they heard about it wasn't because it was extraordinary in a grand sense. It moved people because we recognize, somewhere underneath our daily lives, that we should be doing more of it. That the people we love deserve to have something from us that will survive a hard morning. That grief is made slightly, not entirely, but slightly, more bearable when it has something real to hold. Savannah, in sharing what she shared, was not performing grief or seeking sympathy. She was honoring her mother. She was giving people a glimpse of who Nancy actually was, what she believed, how she loved, the specific and deliberate way she chose to be a mother, even in her final act of it. And there is something in the way Savannah has carried all of this that deserves its own quiet recognition. She has not become defined by this loss. She has not made it a brand or a platform. She has held it privately enough to keep it sacred, and shared just enough for people to feel the truth of it. In a media world that rewards emotional display and constant exposure, that kind of restraint is genuinely rare. It requires a discipline that not everyone has, and it bears a resemblance, if you think about it, to the discipline of the woman who raised her. Her mother gave her a note. She gives the world just enough of the story to matter. There is something of Nancy in that too. After everything, after the career and the loss and the note, and all the mornings that kept arriving regardless, what stays with you is something very simple. A mother knew what her daughter would need. That's really the center of it, not the fame or the morning show or even the faith, as central as the faith is to the story. A mother knew her child well enough to understand what words would reach her, and she wrote them down, and she made sure they would be there on the mornings she couldn't be. That kind of knowing is not something you build quickly. It's built in ordinary moments across many years, in the car rides, the dinners, the conversations that seemed like nothing at the time and turned out to be the whole thing. You can't manufacture it. You can't compress it. You can only build it by showing up again and again, until the person you love is so known to you that you understand not just who they are right now, but who they will need to be later. What they will need to hear, what will hold them when you are no longer there to hold them. Nancy Guthrie did that work, quietly, without applause, without anyone watching, as most mothers do. And Savannah, who has faced cameras for years and held the weight of public life with a steadiness that looks effortless from the outside, carries something none of her viewers will ever quite see. A note from a woman who loved her enough to find the right words and to write them down before it was too late to write anything at all. There is a grief that breaks people. It is real and it is common and it is nothing to dismiss. But there is also a grief that, because of what was left behind, becomes something else over time. Not the absence, or not only the absence. The presence that was placed inside the absence. The voice that remains even when the voice is gone. The words that were chosen on a quiet afternoon deliberately for exactly this. We don't think enough about what we will leave behind. Not in the ordinary days when we are busy and the years feel like they have room in them. But the years are not as long as they feel, and the people around us are paying more attention than we realize. They are listening. They are learning us. They are storing, without knowing they are storing it, everything we give them. Nancy Guthrie understood that. She didn't just understand it, she acted on it. The note was a small thing in the way that the most important things often are: a few pages, a few minutes to read. But it carried decades of a mother's love in it, and it arrived quietly in the right hands at exactly the right time when it was most needed. Some things do. If this story stayed with you, if it brought someone to mind, or something you have been meaning to say but haven't found the moment for yet, sit with that feeling for a little while. Don't rush past it. Leave a comment below if you'd like. Tell us what it brought up for you. These stories are meant to be held, not just watched, and we genuinely read what you share. If someone in your life might need to hear this today, pass it along quietly. No explanation required. Sometimes a story finds the right person in exactly the right moment, and that is enough. Subscribe if you'd like to stay. There are more stories here, human ones, slow ones, the kind that are worth your time.